over to Steve's Manhattan apartment in Washington Heights, not far from where I had lived as a little kid. Steve's room was painted black, and in the room was a big, burly guy. "Stan," said Steve, "this is Gene Klein." Gene had long hair and a beard under his double chin. He was very overweight. I was pretty stocky back then, but this guy was huge. He was wearing overalls and sandals and looked like something from the then-new country music TV show Hee Haw. Gene made it clear right away that he didn't see us as his musical equals. He played some songs for us that I thought were sort of goofy. Then he challenged me to play one of my songs. So I played something called Sunday Driver, which I later retitled Let Me Know. He seemed completely thrown that someone besides John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Gene Klein could write a song. It was a moment of realization for him. He was another guy who wasn't famous who could actually write a song. He was visibly taken aback. He mumbled, I was annoyed that he saw himself as operating at a level that qualified him to pass judgment on me, as though all that mattered was his approval. Particularly because I hadn't thought much of his songs. The idea that he was judging me seemed arrogant, condescending, and ludicrous. He made it clear that he felt himself to be judging from a higher plane, and I didn't like that at all. Gene, of course, had no clue about my ear, which was covered up by my hair, but I was pre-programmed to dislike being scrutinized and judged. It wasn't a nice thing to do as far as I was concerned, and I wasn't eager to work with the guy. Gene wrote a lot of very odd songs. Maybe it was because he was originally from another country. I wasn't sure. He had one called Stanley the Parrot, another called My Uncle is a Raft. He even had one called My Mother is the Most Beautiful Woman in the World. Okay, that's a bit weird. Still, the more we played together, the better it got. Gene and I liked the same kind of music, and we could sing harmonies well together. I decided I wanted to work with him. I could see a bigger picture now, and despite his idiosyncrasies as an only child, teamwork was not Gene's strong suit. We both were intelligent enough to know how to harness ambition. And after all, it would be a lot easier to slay the dragon with a second person to help. As we continued to rehearse together, Steve Coronel ended up joining us too, and we slowly started to become something more and more like an actual band. Gene Klein lived with his mother and her husband in Bayside, Queens. She called me the bum. The three of them lived in a 3-story house. A tenant lived on the ground floor, and Gene and his family lived upstairs. One day I was standing in the front yard talking to Gene, who was hanging out the window. His mother leaned out and in her thick Hungarian accent said, "Stan, please, this is a quiet neighborhood." In other words, I was from the wrong side of the tracks and didn't understand that things were different here in this nice area of town. In his mother's eyes, Gene could do no wrong. If I happened to call when he was in the bathroom, she would say, "The king is on the throne." Even when he was on the toilet, she believed he created masterpieces. I, on the other hand, couldn't get a compliment out of my parents if my life depended on it. They went out of their way not to compliment me. I think they thought they were toughening me up that way. Gene could do no wrong. I could do no right. Of course, when you considered the particulars of my situation, it wasn't so surprising that Gene's mom thought I was a bum. Fortunately for me, despite his mother's opinion of me, Gene seemed to agree that he and I were better together than on our own. Still, although I valued the partnership, I didn't necessarily value the way he dealt with things. He showed up late to rehearsal a lot of the time and never apologized. It wasn't unusual for me to wait more than an hour beyond our scheduled meeting time at a Subway to go together to the rehearsal space. He was very much about himself. It could be maddening, but I paid him back sometimes. One afternoon, Gene and I ordered plates of food and cans of Coke. The place was empty. When Gene went to the bathroom, I grabbed the squeeze bottle of hot mustard and squirted a big dollop into his Coke. When he returned, he put the straw to his lips and took a big swig. I just waited. All of a sudden, his eyes bugged out of his head and started watering, and he screamed, "Oh, my God!" He was 3 years older than I was, and I played pranks on him like a pesky little brother. I realized early on that Gene had been taught to value and appreciate money. Sometimes it worked out nicely. I often gave him my old shoes, for instance. Other times I stirred up shit. I threw pennies into the street in Chinatown because I knew he would run out and retrieve them. I used to just stand on the curb and fling them, and he would run into the gutter to get the coins.